sort of feel a sort of necessary obligation to do this. I think with Sir Clive passing away 2 days ago, there's absolutely no way we would be here now. That wouldn't have been made, all of this wouldn't have happened, I think, if it wasn't Sir Clive. So should we just start with a round of applause? We're not applauding his death, we're applauding his life. Thanks so much for coming here.
Thank you.
I think the big thing for us, I think when we were asked about this about 18 months ago, it's just such a relief to be here, and just that these things are happening, and that we're able to sort of come in and hear that sound and see that, when you just see machines together like this and spread out like this, it just makes you sort of realise, why we do at least what we attempt to do, what we've done.
Yeah.
We've been asked to talk a little bit about the From Bedrooms to Billions films we've made, but what we've got is we've got clips from them and other bits and pieces. But if everybody's seen them, or we could sort of just do Q&A and talk a little bit about them. It's really because we don't really have a clue what we're going to do. We're just going to talk. You want to use the mic? Okay, there we go. Let's try it now. 1, 2.
Hello.
Does that sound better?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Good.
So what we can do is we can either do a little bit of a Q&A about the films, or we can just give a very, very quick overview about how it happened. Because really, well, I'm going to do it now, aren't I?
Yeah, go for it.
The first film really came about originally was in 2009. Nicola and I were doing lots of work on Doctor Who and little things on BBC4, lots of short documentaries and other things for music industry and for generally Doctor Who and science fiction, the same, lots of little things like that, making little documentaries for sort of relatively low budget. And we pitched the BBC in 2009 a 3-part series on the history of the British games industry, because we grew up through the night. I was born in 72. I'm not going to say, oh yeah, it's close.
He's older.
Only a bit. So we, like I'm sure many people in this room, grew up through the 80s and experienced what I think a lot of us would call our rock and roll. As what happened in the late 50s and 60s with that generation experiencing something new. With us, it was computers, the availability of computers, and we kind of were just consumers like everybody else. We weren't experts, we weren't programmers or anything. We just simply sat there one day and said, whatever happened to companies like Ocean and things like that, and whatever happened to Zap? And we kind of wrote these things down on a bit of paper, and we started talking to BBC4 about this 3-part show, and in the end they passed. They just said, and there was a famous, well, not famous to us, quote where they said, the video games industry is too niche for the BBC4 audience, and we sort of, which we thought was obviously very funny at the time, and we sort of parked the project for a while, and we really just sort of went and did something else. We did a film about burlesque, of which we knew nothing about burlesque. We were asked to do a documentary, and it's still bizarre that we even got involved. And then we went back to this idea, this history of the British games industry idea, and we heard about crowdfunding, and we went to a lecture at BAFTA about how filmmakers are now trying to find other means, audience-driven funding, rather than trying to find it elsewhere. So we really dipped our toe in the water in early 2012, and we ran an Indiegogo campaign, but we really had no idea what was going to happen. We did this very awkward presentation, slightly more awkward than this one, but we did this awkward presentation where we sort of said, we want to raise, I can't remember what it was now, 20,
I think we're aiming for 30
or 30 grand.
Yeah.
So basically enough to shoot around 20 interviews, get some editing done, and we were thinking about a 50-minute documentary.
We didn't actually know the story. We thought, we know we want to interview certain people, didn't we? And then we thought, we'll just see what they say and see where the story takes us. And then it kind of grew from there, didn't it? So we'd interview one person and say, oh, you've got to interview this person and that person. And it's grown and grown, and to date, what have we got? About 300 hours worth of interview material.
Yeah. Of unused that haven't been in the films. And we had this, and I think that first film in particular was about we'd sort of do a bit, realise we needed to do more, and then funding was coming in, and one of the things that we found was that the community was driving it. I mean, make no mistake about it. It was constant emails coming in saying, "Oh, heard about your project, sounds fantastic. You should interview such and such," and it kind of grew from there. And we sort of became experts in a way just by simply going around and making that film, trying to make it look as good as tried to do was really about keeping the cost down and going and doing lots of filming in tranches. So you go, I remember once in early December, it took almost a year to get Matthew Smith to do the interview. And working with Paul Drewery, and we'd have these catch-ups, Paul Drewery from Retro Game, we'd have these catch-ups every couple of weeks. How's the Matthew project going? And he goes, oh, you know, he's rung me back and he might do it. And eventually, I remember we got the okay in November 2012. We were told, oh my God, it's that long ago. We were told Matthew's going to do it, but we've got to get a venue in Liverpool somewhere. So we found out where the arcade was that he went to as a kid, which now I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was on a pier, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was very run down.
Very, very run down here. But I remember ringing the manager up and saying to him, we're doing an interview with Matthew Smith. Can we? And he went, oh, there'll be no charge. Just come in. When do you need it? And it was, well, next Monday. Yeah, sure. No problem. We'll shut the venue for a couple of hours. Allow you to do it. It's amazing. So we get there. Matthew Smith comes in, and then the manager's outraged, thinking that we were going to be interviewing Doctor Who. So absolutely true story. He was sort of, I said Matthew Smith, he created, you know, these legendary games on the ZX Spectrum. So it did actually turn around. The manager was a good guy, and was, you know, but he did quietly open the venue in the background. But that was one of many interviews that we would get, and we would tend to interview someone for sort of 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and eventually, within about 2 years, we had these a huge number of interviews, and we knew we needed to cut a film, which everybody by this point was saying, you know, oh, it needs, you know, surely it's gonna do everything and cover every subject, and we knew that was impossible. So we had this sort of 8-hour timeline of material.
It was longer than that. It's about 15 hours.
It was that long, wasn't it?
It went on and on and on, because we were like, oh, we can't drop this, we can't drop that, so we just played with it for ages, didn't we, and got it down to 2.5 hours, which is still probably quite too long.
Meanwhile, continuing to get emails from people saying you've got to interview such and such. I mean, Clive Townsend still, to me, is someone that slipped, and we never got the Stampers, never got Andrew Braybrook, though I must have written so many emails to him, but he was just private and just didn't really want to do an interview, but he was very complimentary about the project. But there's certain personal ones, you know, I was a Commodore 64 user, so Braybrook and other C64 developers, there were some that I really wanted, there was some that Nicola wanted, but I think in the end we were pleased with the general spread that we had, because we had to get publishers and we had to get people as well that maybe for the majority of people seeking nostalgia didn't matter to them. But we knew, like Nick Alexander, for example, who ran Virgin, that he had a key story, because that was a big part of the distribution story, and Imagine with Bruce Everest and others. So there were sort of people in there that we knew we had to get in there because of their importance. But in the end, I think we sort of dropped it over the finishing line. Came out around October 2014, after 2.5 years of actual production and filming. I think there's about 90 odd interviews in the film. And we were quite pleased with that and quite proud of obviously to have got it out, and the general reaction was very positive, though we always felt there was more we wanted to do, and more that we could have done with all the extra footage we had. So we then decided, while we were making that film, we continually were hearing about the Amiga being used by developers to create games for different platforms, and we realised that the Amiga was incredibly important as a development system. So we we were looking at taking unused footage from the first film and doing a spin-off. And in the end, probably with the same sort of attitude as the first one, we ended up using none of the footage from the first film and shooting an entirely new set of interviews, and did the Amiga Years, which I could actually attempt to bring up the, will it go to the right? Let's see if I can even see the mouse here. No, that's wrong. Oh, there you go. It's actually teeny tiny, yeah. Well, that's the. Oh, I should have actually said before we moved over. We ran this Kickstarter campaign, and that was obviously a crucial thing with the first film, because we were able to get people such as Oliver Frey and other members of the community to create artwork and other things, which gave fans a sort of real feel to be part of it. So we did a similar sort of thing with the Amiga Years, and Oliver did this wonderful piece of artwork for us, and we made that film. That was harder to make actually than the first film, simply because we did a lot of US filming in that one, and across Europe as well, Sweden and and other places. So it took.
It was quite challenging
France.
with the budget because we had to try and get your film in individual people, whereas when we were in the UK you could just bunch a load of people together and that worked okay. But with America, that was jumping through hoops a lot, wasn't it, out there as well, and trying to get all these people. But we got there in the end, but we did a lot of remote filming for that because it kept the budget down. With us, we couldn't fly out there, sadly.
No. That was another thing that we discovered, that it was good to use second units, and you could then free more money up for other aspects, get more interviews in, because it's not like you can make life-changing amounts of money from these films. It's kind of, you make a living from them and you can continue to make it and you put it back into the film. So you go, we can get another 3 interviews in with that now. Now that's coming. And we did something called a backer pack, which is very successful, where we edited up some of the clips from the first movie, unused material, and anybody that used to back the future films used to get that as well. And they used to like that, and that also brought more budget into the films. And then after that, I can't remember exactly why. I think it was one of those things where during making the Amiga years, so many people were telling us about how the PlayStation changed things for them. And again, it was original intention once again to use unused footage from the first 2 films to make the third, and that went out the window. We ended up shooting the whole thing pretty much from scratch. I think there's maybe 2 interviews from the early. I think Mark Healy's interview is from Bedrooms in that. But other than that, it's all new material, and we released that last year during the pandemic. So
great timing.
It kind of had to come out then because we sort of wanted to link it in with the anniversary of the original PS1 release. But we sort of felt that after the 3 films, we sort of thought, okay, well that's a trilogy now. That's something that we want to do, and we kind of feel this pull to go back into the 80s again, and we're now working on. We're now doing an anniversary film with Matthew Smith for the release of Manic Miner and Jet Set Willy, which is coming up in obviously 2023 and 2024. So it's not officially announced yet. We're just still talking about it. It looks extremely likely, and we very much want to do it. Matthew wants to do it, so we're just trying to sort the rights out, because the rights of those 2 games are all over the place. So
I think we quite like the idea of focusing on some specific people now. Because that's the thing, we've done interviews with a lot of these people and they're like 2-3 hours long, aren't they?
Yeah.
And we think, well, none of that material's out there, but we do want to do some new interviews, so that's why we thought Matthew Smith would be a good one. We've interviewed him a couple of times, haven't we? So, So,
Matthew's wonderful. Well, he's a really nice guy. Matthew's wonderful. He's a really nice guy. But you've got to work through the interview with him. You've got to be prepared to work through it and
it's
allow
quite a tough time for him as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So that's quite hard.
And I think we kind of want to do a new interview with Matthew as well, because now he's got teeth. And I think that, sorry mate, I know you might end up seeing this, but that's the key thing, and that's what he said to us. Because from Bedrooms he doesn't look his best, and I think he's the first to say that, and I think it kind of actually had a positive effect on him when he saw the film, and a lot of things changed because of the way he saw him. But that day was great fun. He was actually quite awesome that day. He took us around a load of the arcade machines, and he couldn't believe that the same place was still there from when he grew up. So we've sort of been putting this idea together for a little while, of something which not just talks about Manic Miner and Jet Set Willy and how Matthew did it, but the significance of the Spectrum, and if anything, as we were talking about at the start with Sir Clive Sinclair passing the other day, I think we probably all know how profound it was that you could get a home computer that's pre-assembled. Remember, when computers first became available in the UK in the late 70s, you might have been looking at a 4,000 solder joint, flat-packed system that you could put together. One joint you got wrong, the thing didn't work out. So the idea of actually being able to buy something from the shops that you could take home and program, people would take that for granted now, but for our generation it was a really significant thing, because then you could write, and for somebody like Matthew, though he was porting code across to the Spectrum, but the point was he was able to effectively write on the target machine and release a game for that target machine. And if you go back in time to the 60s and the 70s, children, young adults, as computing became available, really it was mainframes. They might get to look at something or run a program on something, but they couldn't go home and continue that sort of enthusiastic programming. I wonder what happens if I do such and such or this. In the 60s and 70s, games were literally treated as contraband, as drugs. They were, if you were on either a military installation or you were in a university, whether it be in the States or over here, games were sort of, they traded them in corridors at 1 o'clock in the morning, or the system was used at 2 o'clock. We heard a story Dave Lebling was talking to us about on another project we've been working on with Infocom days. He said that the administrators would wonder why the power had gone up on the system, why the system seemed to be working at their hardest at 3 a.m. And they were saying, well, there's nothing supposed to be running on these machines here. And we were hearing all these amazing stories that in the 60s and 70s, when a lot of the gaming genres we take for granted were actually devised on mainframes, and whether certain, not every genre, but a lot of genres were devised in people's spare time. And of course, once we got to the point in the late 70s when we had pre-assembled computers available for just a few hundred quid, dollars, then that suddenly led to this new revolution. And home computers themselves, that's where these other genres were created, because obviously games up until that point in the arcades were coin driven. Things were short play, short turnaround time, where you didn't want someone playing it for hours, you wanted them putting coins in. Home computers saw the development of different types of games with where play times went out the window. If anything, you wanted someone playing longer and being more absorbed by a game. So that's the thing. When people ask us about the history of the games industry, it's kind of, there's a branch system really. You've got the arcade industry that sort of went up like that, the home computer industry that sort of started to appear in the late 70s, but that was inspired by what was going on in the arcades. Most developers' first ever game was an arcade rip-off, because that was the point of reference to go from. It makes sense, I'll do a Pac-Man type game to learn how to program. Hence the fact that nearly every great developer that we interviewed, Braben, Crammond, all these developers, it was a rip-off of an arcade game that they did first. Great, Jeff Crammond was Super Invaders, wasn't it? Yeah, so there you go. So we've, I'm trying to remember where I am now. So we obviously made these 3 films, and we sort of feel very blessed that we met so many wonderful people along the way to do them, and that's why we kind of want to do something which is back in that original 80s era next. And hopefully it's untitled yet, at the moment it's just Manic Miner stroke Jet Set Willy project, but the idea is to maybe do a series of short documentaries on this one thing, so you'd have one master film, but then other things which maybe look at the significance of the spectrum and other things. So that's where we're hoping to go next. And we've also got we've also been working on a project for some time now, not deliberately secretly, but we kind of wanted, when you're making a film and you want to put it on a Blu-ray, there's some serious constraints about what you can do. There's you've got to clear everything. It's very, very expensive. Archive itself is very, very expensive. And I don't want to say we were frustrated by it, because the whole point of the YouTube community is that's the next evolution. That's where things are going. There's some wonderful documentaries that are made that are free to view on YouTube, and we kind of were attracted to the idea of being able to do stuff quicker, because we are a bit slow. When we tend to do stuff, it does take a while for it to come out, and that's usually because of the amount of work that goes into filming it and making it look good. We're very picky about how things are. So we've decided to do a YouTube channel, which we're going to launch the first video for next Friday, we hope, but it should be Friday. It's called Cabin Fever, and to try and make it different from everything else, we've looked at the fact that people have often said to us they love the archive that we use, which obviously isn't ours. Archive is third party, it belongs to other people, but we want to try and show it in a way so that the video looks like a sort of living magazine, and it's sort of kind of hard to explain. And the archive itself, we photograph or we video rather than using electronic plugins. We're going to try and do it what we call in the lens, so that if we're talking about an instruction manual, we film it rather than actually digitizing it and scanning it in. And it's a test, and the idea is to see if people like it. So we've got a few, but we have got some really amazing guests lined up. So the idea is where we used to do a lot of our capturing for our films was in the cabin at the end of the garden. Seriously, just a basic, and it's not a man cave. It's What is it?
A man cave. Although you deny it.
Yes.
I think the idea of Cabin Fever is just somewhere where we can go explore some other things as well. We like a lot of sci-fi, and so we're talking about interviewing some of the people that worked on the effects for Doctor Who, from various other projects that we've done. We're talking about going and discussing music, retro gaming, modern day gaming, whatever. Just a place like a magazine type show, if you like, that's going to put a lot of stuff in there that we know we can't put in our films. It might be stuff that some of our stock footage that we might use, some unused material that we edit together, but just somewhere that it can sit for people to go and have a look at, isn't it?
That's absolutely right. And the purpose of it is really so that it's one of those places that you can go and it's like putting on an old leather jacket that feels comfortable, so that you're seeing archive that perhaps is nostalgic, or films, or lots of different subjects in there. But we're trying to get some very interesting guests in, so it won't just be game developers. But one of our first guests is actually going to be Stu Cambridge, who actually has done. Stu Cambridge is the artist behind The Sensible World of Soccer, Cannon Fodder, various others. And as I have it here, I, at the very least, should show you the.
This is the artwork he's created for Cabin Fever. Hopefully.
Now this is the bit where you hope that if I press that.
That's our logo.
Leave it looping in the background. Yeah, so Stu Cambridge did this lovely bit of artwork for us. So the idea is that it's a collection of stuff. So it's not just going to be games, though there's going to be a lot of games in it. We're going to talk about music and other things. And there's lots of different people, and it won't just be Nicola and I, but the idea is the cabin itself is a sort of focal point for where we used to do a lot of the work on the From Bedrooms to Billions films, and we used to find that we'd be sitting there talking about games and maybe how they link into certain films or the inspiration from it, and somebody actually suggested to us, you should film that. So we ended up doing a pilot with my brother last year, because my brother worked quite closely with us on the films, and we liked it, and then we added a bit of archive and some other bits and pieces. I'll just show you a clip. We've got a very short clip from a little bit of episode 1. My God, this is a test. This is a test. Okay, so I think this is on Spitfire.
Spitfire 40, which I'd be honest with you,
No,
I did something on the C64 emulator on the PC years ago and sped it up with stock photos. Oh, you can't do that. I don't think you can do it to get that advanced on this. And I literally sped it up to like 500%, and it was just a fraction.
What's the volume for it?
No, it still had that sort of overcranked look. You know that black and white movie sound. That everyone was frame or second.
Yeah, this was about the fact that we were talking about emulation, and went back when we used to speed up flight simulators from in terms Spitfire 40 was a game that Stephen and I, my brother and I, used to play a lot as kids. And when I got an emulator for it many years later, I just sped it up. That was all. We were just talking about the fact of how it looked.
Left and on. Yeah, actually, let's have a look. We have to look, and then we'll turn it off. Yeah.
Okay. You have to be there, really. No, I think the idea is we're not trying to be comedians or anything, but the idea is stuff comes up spontaneously, and also the idea is we do them live, so that any research stuff we look up or talk about, we capture it as we go. That's kind of the idea. So if we pick up a manual, we're actually filming it and doing it live. It's kind of watch the first couple and you'll get the idea from it. But
Hopefully.
yeah, hopefully. That's why we brought a short clip of it along with us, so at least we had something to show. But I think what's the time? Because I think we'll just open up if anyone wants to ask us anything. I think we've talked extensively about those films. If I may, ladies first, if I may.
How do you go about finding like the best interviews? Like, do you have an approach you take, or do you just kind of throw everything out there and say we're going to grab everyone, or do you sort of pinpoint and?
How do we decide who we want to interview, basically?
Yeah, and then how do you go about doing it? Like, what's your approach?
first thing we do is we make a list. So we make a list of who we would feel is crucial. What tends to happen is you do a first batch of filming, and then you tend to find things come up from that filming. See, when you're making a documentary, there's two ways of doing it. One is you can have a preconceived idea about exactly what you want to do. You hire a location and you bring as many of those people along to that one location, and you film maybe in a couple of the different rooms, and then you've got, say, your interviews, you go and do it. With these films, they were a bit more organic, where we would do a clutch of interviews, look at what we've got, and then that would lead on to others. Sometimes in an interview they'll say, oh, the big... And you kind of learn as you go. You think you know what you want, but with documentaries they do tend to sort of twist and turn a bit in terms of where you go. So that for us, they were always very organic. We'd have an initial list, and then we'd sort of go off, and then people would say, you should really talk to such and such, or you should do this, or they're available. With the PlayStation revolution, it was completely different. With the PlayStation, it was locked in from the start, because the Japanese took nearly over a year to land. So
I think that's the thing. I think as the films have gone on, from bedrooms, it was a lot easier. We could just contact people through Facebook and that, and or like LinkedIn, things like that. And then people would say, "Oh, get in touch with so and so." As Anthony said, once we got to the PlayStation, a lot of the developers in there, the Japanese, my God, we had to really jump through hoops. And it's a very specific way that you have to approach them, and if you don't do it right, they won't. It's like you're not going to get through the door. So, as Ant says, it was probably about a year with them, and there were some that you interview them, and then you have to buy them a bottle of whiskey. There was one for, wasn't there? Because we thought we really want to stay.
He didn't ask
for it, but we thought we really want to stay in with you because you know the company are amazing. We thought, well, if we keep you happy, so it's all about maintaining those relationships as well. But yeah, I'd say it got harder as the films have gone on, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think the PlayStation Revolution was the hardest film we ever made. The only thing I will say, one thing I'll say about the Japanese is, people can be put off thinking, oh, you know, they're so rigid and everything, but in fact it's different. It's just they want to know exactly what it's going to be, but then they're all in. So when we got the Resident Evil guys together, they hadn't been together in the same room for 15 years, and they were going, oh, do you want the typewriter? Yeah, the one we used to model for the first Resi. Bioshock, actually. Yeah, sure. Put that on the table. We've got the first gun. We've got this, and all these props they still had that were just hanging around in the corridor.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh man, it's like
yes, put all that in there.
And you have to pretend to not be geeky. You have to pretend, oh, if you like, you know, we'll do that. We'll have that typewriter. You know, fine. You know, can we get a picture of me next to it? I just want to touch it. Yeah, that sort of thing. So there's a bit of that, but the Japanese did get really into it, and the same with Hideo Kojima. That took 18 months to get that interview, continual submitting questions, trying to get a date, and eventually it happened, and then he really enjoyed it. And that's the thing, I think he was, when you start talking about different aspects of their lives and what they're doing, they all sort of go, oh, I enjoyed that, that was good fun. So yeah, I think that answers that okay. If I may, just out of politeness to the gentleman over there. So.
You mentioned at the start of your talk that you were first approached the BBC to make this documentary and said, oh, it's very niche. Do you think mainstream media completely misunderstands the gaming market and just thinks it's aimed at children? Because all we've had are things like Bad Influence, Games Master. There's never been anything in this genre for the adult market. And I just think the bigwigs, they just don't get it at all.
You are completely right. I have to say, before I go any further, that is a fantastic T-shirt, and I have to get one of those. That is
remember where we got it from?
The answer to that, I completely agree with you. I think they still struggle to this day. However, what I can say is there was a show called MIP, which is a sort of a TV show. It's like an exhibition for television production makers, and we went this year. Well, it was all done virtually, and on nearly every list of what broadcasters are looking for, they've put gaming, streaming. So they've cottoned on to the fact that they've lost so many viewers to gaming. They have to do something.
But I think they've put gaming, but they don't know what. They just put gaming because they've not got any fresh ideas for how that should be done, or they'll put esports. But it's just you can tell that it's changing a little bit, that they're recognising they need to do that. But
I think the dinosaurs now, because it's all on YouTube, as you said, or people are making their own stuff through Kickstarter and things like that. So they're redundant, really.
Yeah.
I think we did have there was 2 separate commissioning editors that said the same excuse to me. You can't tell me that the British games industry is any more important than the British motor industry. And it's like, yeah, but I've seen documentaries on the British motor industry, you know, about the decline of it, and I think that's the problem. There didn't seem to be that person at any of the broadcasters we went to that went, I'm a gamer, I get this story, I understand, let's make this happen. It was always it was a no from the start in case, so we kind of didn't bother going back. I mean, from Bedrooms to Billions, we sent it into the BBC in the hope that they might screen it or at least discuss with us about it. It was sent back unopened because it was considered unsolicited material.
I wonder if they see it as a threat as well. So I think if they're seen to be endorsing something, that obviously you're not watching their channel if you're gaming, which was something
so why
that
make
was said
documentaries
to us.
about books and music?
I know. They don't get it.
We're not
sadly.
Is that okay? Yeah. This gentleman, I think, had a question next.
Yeah. So I'm an Amiga fanboy, so it's a bit of a biased question, but as a 12-year-old in 1986, we had an Amiga 1000. I knew it was just so far ahead of its time and such a magical machine. Did you guys was that a discovery while you were making Bedrooms to Billions that led you to make the Amiga Years, or you knew that already?
I had an Amiga, so I was, but again, only as a consumer, and did some basic programming, but certainly nothing that I could actually consider myself as a programmer. But yeah, I think you're right. We learned all about the 1000 while making the Amiga Years. We heard a lot from developers about the significance of the Amiga as a development tool, and this is the thing that people didn't quite get. See, in Europe, the A500 went on to be, well, David Pleasance will be here, went on to be a huge hit. So we remember in the States, you get a lot of Amiga. I mean, there is an Amiga community, don't get me wrong, we'll be hung from a lamppost if we said that there wasn't, but the point was it wasn't a mass market, it wasn't a Commodore 64, for example, it wasn't a killer system. So yeah, we learned everything about the significance of it from making that film. One thing we have got is Dave Needle has the first A1000 that came off the production line, which we filmed. About
on the side.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, he also told us about and they had this pact that they weren't going to reveal it, and then Dave decided to tell us, which was that when they gave the Amiga chip designs to Atari for contractual purposes, they doctored the plans so they would never work.
Really?
Yeah, and they all kept that secret until Dave decided to tell us.
They said it, and then they were all like, "Oh right, okay, we'll all say it then."
Yeah, so we learnt a lot on that movie.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for making that. I've watched it over and over.
Oh, thank you.
It's the best in the series.
Oh, really?
But, yeah, I can't get enough of it.
I kind of wish, in some ways, that's a film I'd love to go back to, because one of the things that people would say to us, they were enjoying the Commodore part of the story, and then halfway through we changed tack and we go into development.
The Commodore documentary, there's quite a few around, and if I was a film editor, I'd like to just slush them together to make the perfect one. They've all got, you guys got some great interviews and the focus on the Amiga, but some of the Jack Tramiel stories kind of out in the Commodore story.
Yeah.
Just nice to have an alternate edition.
Yeah.
A 5-hour sort of, a WTF cut. Sort of, yeah. Absolutely. Thanks for the kind words.
Thank you.
Anybody else? A question? Oh, go on then.
As filmmakers, how do you sort of prepare yourself to make a compelling interview? Do you have any techniques? Or?
Yeah. How do we do our interviews? A lot of preparation. So we often get, when we email the questions through, which maybe 50% read in advance. Usually it's, my God, that's a lot of questions. So we tend to ask a lot. So we want to come away. If we're doing an interview, we want it to be about their life. Generally, sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes you get given 40 minutes and that's it. But you've got to prepare. I mean, we've always done that. You have to do your research. I would say it probably takes a full day maybe a day and a half of research before an interview, and then send it a week before, because then sometimes the interviewee will come back with nuggets back. Oh, you haven't asked me about such and such, or this needs to come up. So you get better results with more preparation.
Have you ever had anyone say, I'm not going to talk about that?
Yeah, I think that happens to every interviewer at some point.
Yeah.
You tend to get an idea when you're going down a road that they kind of want to close off. Yeah, and like we did some interviews in the States for a project about the really early industry, the 60s and 70s. That project, we don't know when it's coming out or anything at the moment, and we interviewed Nolan Bushnell and Al Alcorn and others, and the Me Too was happening, so all the stories about the hot tub, no, can't talk about that. Whereas a year earlier, maybe we might have got the kitchen sink, but yeah. So there was a little bit of that then, when because the hot tub in Atari was well known, and it was full of engineers. The idea that there were naked women in there didn't happen. You know, it was like engineers would go in there when they needed a wash. That was it.
Nice.
Did you have a question at the back there?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, how hard was it to track down Matthew Smith? Because he was a bit like, no one knew where he was, didn't he, for years? Like.
Paul Drewery is basically his secretary. Sorry, Paul. More than that, but no, he's Paul Drewery of Retro Gamer has played a critical part in working with us over the years. And journalists as well will share contacts. That's the point. If we've got somebody that somebody needs, then people will write to us and say, do you have something? But one of the most common interviews we're asked about is, could we provide Matthew Smith's phone number or his address? We don't have it. It's only ever come through Paul, and that's probably the way it should be, because Paul is a really great guy, and really gets him. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Ooh. Are we at that? Anybody else? So we've got PlayStation, Amiga, and the first film. Any other questions about it? I'm trying to think if I've got anything else to add, really.
Some questions for the kids.
Our kids, actually, my daughter said before this started, have I got to sit through Mummy and Daddy's boring talk? So she may or may not be right. I don't know. But I will say one thing though. These films in general, we've relied on Kickstarter and we've relied on crowdfunding to make them happen. And there's always been a sense, and I'm sure it's the same with Stephen Fletcher and others. There's that sense of expectation that you're giving something back that people want. But I'll tell you what, it's a real buzz when you've got people, when the campaign's happening. And I know you need the money to make the film, but you're not thinking, because there's other ways of making money. But it's a real thing to know you're making something that people want to see. So it does really make a huge difference, and crowdfunding and the community itself has done that. And this show itself, you take RetCon and other shows like it, that really, if you go back 20 years, 15 years, they're the reason why there's been these productions made, because they kept it going. And I mean, computer clubs anyway, when they started, there wouldn't be a games industry if it wasn't for computer clubs. It's as simple as that, because that's where people were able to exchange ideas and programming techniques and other things. So shows like this are the lifeblood of it, Yes. Okay. Unless there's any other questions, I think we'll wrap up then in that case. It's pretty hot here. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, one last thing I will say. We've actually got some leftover perks and bits and pieces, just some Oliver Frey posters and things. We weren't sure if there was going to be much interest, so we're going to bung them out on the table, and probably for an hour or so, and we'll just hang around the table. If anyone wants them signed or anything like that, we'll have them available. So, as it's an empty table at the moment. So, thanks very much.
Okay.